Montana Territory, October 1879, the first snow had come early. It clung to the pine branches like ash, quieting the forest and icing the breath of the lone rider cutting through it. His name was Porter McCrae, a 32-year-old cowboy with a rifle strapped to his saddle and a permanent squint from too many years under unforgiving skies. He had been driving cattle down from the high summer pastures when he spotted the broken-down shed half covered by brush, tucked back in the trees off the old mining road. He would not have stopped if not for the tracks. Small, uneven boot prints in the snow too narrow for a man, too dragging for someone strong. Porter dismounted, boots crunching, hand near his holster. He pushed open the warped door with the butt of his glove. The hinges groaned. Inside, it was dark and smelled like mold and old hay. Then he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner beneath a collapsed section of the roof, wrapped in a torn wool coat, arms around her knees. Her face was pale, hollow-cheeked, lips cracked. She could not have been older than 20. Her eyes locked on his like a deer cornered by fire. "Please don't," she rasped, voice raw. "I will leave, I just needed—" Porter knelt, holding his hands out like he might to a spooked mare. "I am not here to hurt you." She tried to rise but swayed, then dropped back against the wall. Her whole body was shaking. "You are starving," he said, more to himself than to her. His heart thudded hard in his chest. "You are coming home with me." She blinked at him, dazed. "Why?" "Because I am not about to leave someone to die in a damn shed." He took off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, then lifted her easily into his arms. She was light as a sack of cornmeal and just as limp. "My name is Porter McCrae. I got a cabin 5 miles from here. You will be warm, fed, and safe." She pressed her face into his chest and whispered, Etta Zeller." He looked down at her. "All right, Etta, let's get you out of this cold." The ride back to his cabin was slow. He tied her horse thin frame to his chest with his bedroll so she would not fall. She barely stirred. By the time they reached the edge of his land, dusk had fallen and the snow had thickened. His cabin was small but solid, tucked near the tree line with smoke already curling from the chimney he had stoked the fire before heading out. He laid her down on the cot nearest the hearth and stoked the flames high. Then he set a pot of broth to heat and brought her a blanket. As the room warmed, her shivering slowed. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. "I did not mean to trespass." Porter crouched beside her. "Do not worry about that. I ran. I did not think I would make it this far. You do not have to explain anything tonight. Eat first." He helped her drink the broth slowly. She winced as it went down, as if her stomach had forgotten how to hold food, but she finished the bowl. He set it aside. "You got anyone who might be looking for you?" She shook her head. Her hands clenched the blanket tight. "I will not let anyone hurt you here," he said simply. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Over the next 2 days, Etta slept more than she woke. Porter kept the fire going, made her simple meals: soft bread soaked in broth, mashed potatoes, stewed apples. She ate little but enough. The color returned to her face slowly. He did not ask questions. Not yet. She finally spoke again on the 3rd night when he brought her a cup of tea. "I had nowhere else to go." Porter sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "What happened?" Etta looked into the fire. "My father died last spring. He owed a man, a banker from Helena. We were behind on the land payments. I tried to work it off, but—" She swallowed. Porter's jaw clenched. "He hurt you?" "No," she said quickly. "But he wanted to marry me. I said no, so he took the land, took everything. Said I could stay as his wife or leave. I left. You came all the way up here alone?" I thought I had an aunt in Butte, but when I got there, she had passed. I had no money, no one. I just kept walking. I saw the shed when the snow started." Porter felt something tighten in his chest. She was strong, she had to be, to make it that far. "You are safe now," he said again. She looked at him then. Really looked. "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone should have a long time ago." By the end of the week, Etta was standing on her own. Porter gave her his mother's old shawl and a pair of trousers from his sister's last visit. She helped him slice potatoes for supper, hands still trembling but steadier now. "You live out here alone?" she asked. He nodded. After my brother died in the war, I took what was left of the family land. Been working cattle and trapping since. No wife, no, never found the right one. She glanced at him, then looked away quickly. That night she stood by the fire as he washed the dishes. Snow tapped the windows, soft as breath. I do not want to be a burden, she said. You are not, she turned to him. I want to work, help, I can sew, clean, cook, I will earn my keep. Porter dried his hands. You do not owe me for saving your life. I do not want to be saved, I want to live. He stepped closer. Then stay, not because you owe me. Because I want you here, her breath caught. Why? Because I like hearing your voice in this house. Because I like seeing you stronger each day. Because I think you are braver than anyone I have ever met. She stared at him, then reached out and touched his hand. I want to stay, she said, voice barely above a whisper, his fingers curled around hers. Then you are home. The days turned colder, but Etta's hands stayed busy. She had taken to mending what needed repair without being asked. Porter's shirts, the torn curtain beside the stove, the frayed hem of a saddle blanket. She found a rhythm in the quiet, in the way the wood creaked under her steps and the snow settled thick along the eaves. Porter let her work without interfering, but he noticed the stillness in the cabin had softened, as if her presence warmed more than just the hearth. On the 6th day, he came in from chopping wood to find her standing at the window, cloth in hand, wiping away the frost in slow circles. You ever worked cattle? He asked, setting his gloves on the table. Her gaze stayed on the trees. No, closest I got was watching them from the edge of our cornfield. She paused, but I wouldn't be afraid to try. You don't have to, he said. I'll never ask you to do what don't suit you. She turned to face him. Didn't say it wouldn't suit me, just said I haven't yet. Porter gave a slow nod. There's a heifer due to calve before the month's out. You can come with me tomorrow if you're set on learning. I am, she said, and something in her voice held firm. The next morning they rode out before first light. Porter had saddled the bay mare for her, adjusting the stirrups lower. Etta didn't complain about the cold or the stiff saddle, only asked questions: what signs to look for in a birthing cow, how to read the angle of a slope for shelter, why some calves came early and some late. She didn't speak just to fill the silence, and that suited Porter fine. They stopped near a thicket where the herd had bedded down. He dismounted and tied his horse. Etta followed, careful with her footing. That one there, Porter said, pointing to a red and white cow resting near the back. She's heavy in the belly and keeping to herself. That's the one we watch. Etta studied the animal a long while, her brow furrowed. She limping, left hind leg stiff. Good eye. Etta didn't smile, but her chin lifted slightly. She crouched, resting her forearms on her knees. You ever lose one in winter? Too many, he said. But not if I can stop it. As the wind picked up, Porter offered her his scarf. She hesitated, then took it, wrapping it once around her neck. They watched the herd another hour, moving little, speaking less. Snow fell soft over the pasture, and neither of them minded. That night, back in the cabin, Etta pulled off her boots by the fire and set them near the hearth to dry. Her fingers were red from the cold, but she didn't complain. Porter poured water into the basin and set it before her. That leg of yours all right, little sore, but I'll walk fine tomorrow. He settled across from her, elbows on the table. You ever think about where you'd go if you had the choice? She dipped the rag in the basin and wrung it out. Used to think I'd find a place near water, where I could plant something and watch it grow from start to finish. She looked at him. Now I think maybe it wasn't the water I wanted, maybe it was steadiness. Porter's throat worked around the words he wasn't ready to say. There's a creek down the ridge, fed by snowmelt come spring. Place greens up nice once the thaw hits. Etta folded the cloth, setting it aside. You ever plant anything? Couple rows of beans, some squash, enough to keep through winter. She leaned back in her chair, stretching her legs toward the fire. If I stayed, I'd like to try something more. Something that comes back each year, he nodded slowly. Then we'll build a bed for it come thaw, pick a spot with sun. Her eyes flicked toward him. I figure you're part of this place now if you want to be. She didn't answer right away. She just reached over and picked up the cup he'd left beside her plate. She drank, then set it down with care. "I think I do," she said, her voice low. That night, long after the fire had banked and the wind had stilled outside, Porter lay awake on his cot, staring at the rafters. The cabin had always been enough for him: walls to keep the wind out, a roof that held through storms, silence he could live inside without going mad. But now, in that silence, he could hear her breathing. Slow, steady. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something inside him stretch like spring roots testing frozen ground. The snow deepened in the weeks that followed, blanketing the hills and muffling the world down to breathe and hoofbeat. Etta had taken to waking just before first light, sweeping ashes from the stove and laying kindling before Porter stirred. She moved with quiet purpose, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hair pinned in a knot that loosened by mid-morning. One afternoon, while she was rinsing sheets with melted snow water out back, she glanced toward the ridge and said, "There's something up that way." Porter looked up from where he was oiling his saddle straps. "You see movement," she nodded. "Looked like a buck, tall." "Might have been watching me." "Could be," he said. "Deer come down lower when it's this cold." She knelt to wring out the linen, her fingers red and raw. "I used to see them near the river by our old place. My brother swore one had a white star on its chest. Said it followed him once." "You have a brother still living?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "He drowned when I was little, slipped under the ice." Porter didn't speak to that, just reached over and handed her his gloves. She hesitated, then took them, slipping them on without a word. Later that night, after supper, she brought out a small bundle of fabric she'd kept tucked under the cot. "I started something," she said, sitting across from him. "Didn't know if I should, but I did anyway." She unfolded a square of coarse linen, stitched with a pattern of pine boughs and a low, sloping hill. The thread was uneven, the colors faint, but the scene was clear. "This place?" he asked. She nodded. "I wanted to remember what it looked like before everything greens up." He studied the stitching for a long moment. "You got a good hand." "I didn't for years. My mother said I was too impatient. Always pricked my fingers or pulled too tight. Looks steady to me." She folded the cloth again, her fingers brushing the edge. "I thought maybe I'd keep adding to it, a little each week. So when I'm old, I'll remember how it looked when it was still quiet." "You'll be here to remember it," he said. She looked at him, her gaze lingering longer than she'd let it before. "You sure I should be? I've never said anything I didn't mean." A log shifted in the stove, sending sparks up the chimney. She didn't look away. "I never thought I'd trust a man again." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "Not all at once." She ran her thumb along the edge of the folded linen. "Then maybe I'll try a little at a time." The next morning, he showed her how to saddle the pack mule, explaining the purpose of each strap and cinch. She listened carefully, her hands moving with growing certainty. When they rode out to check the fence line, she didn't ask to rest, even when her thighs stiffened from the saddle. At one break, as they drank from the canteens, she turned toward the valley below. "There's a spot down there I like," she said. "Where the trees bend over the creek, it feels." "Still, I know the one," he said. "Used to take my dog there when I was a boy. He'd chase squirrels until he dropped." She smiled faintly. "We had a hound once, wouldn't stop barking unless you gave him a potato." "You ever keep bees?" "No, always wanted to. Figured they'd be good for the garden." "We'll build a box come spring." She looked at him sharply, as if catching something in his tone. "You keep saying we." "That's the plan," he said. She didn't answer right away, just turned back to the landscape and stood in silence. Then softly, "I think I like the sound of that." That evening, she placed her sewing beside his hat on the table. When he sat down, she said, "If I stitched your name into the corner, would that be all right?" He looked up. "You planning to give it to someone else?" "No." "Then it's all right." She dipped her head, fingers brushing the cloth once more before setting her needle. Outside, the wind picked up, but the fire held steady. The last of the snow held in the shady folds of the hills, but the air had begun to shift, less bite to the wind, more scent of thaw and wet bark. Etta stood barefoot on the cabin stoop one morning, sleeves rolled to her elbows. a bucket of water at her side. The ground beneath her feet was still cold but not frozen solid anymore. She let her toes press into the softening dirt. Inside, Porter was bent over the table, sharpening a drawknife. He glanced up when he heard her shift her weight. "You'll catch cold standing like that." "I won't," she said. "Not anymore." He set the blade down. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I mean to stay." That brought a quiet between them, not heavy, just settled. She dipped the rag into the bucket and began wiping down the windowsill, moving slow, like she'd grown used to taking her time with things. Porter stood and moved to the hearth. "I'll be going down to the old mill trail today. Saw a tree come down across the path yesterday. Could use clearing." She wrung out the cloth and kept wiping. "You want help?" "Not with that." He paused. "But I could use someone keeping an eye on the stove while I'm gone. That stew won't watch itself." She gave a single nod. "I'll mind it." He stepped into his boots, pulled on his coat, then paused at the door. "If I'm not back by dusk, I likely ran into something worth skinning." "Don't keep me guessing," she said. "If you come back late, come back with something useful." He grinned faintly and shut the door behind him. By mid-afternoon, the stew had thickened, and Etta had swept the cabin floor twice, not because it needed it, but because her hands wanted something to do. She paused only when she heard hoofbeats steady, measured. She opened the door, but it wasn't Porter. An older man, face wind-burned and turned hard by years, sat a dun gelding just beyond the gate. He wore a patched coat and carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked down at her with sharp eyes. "You Porter McCrae's woman?" She stepped out and closed the door behind her. "Who's asking?" "Name's Thorne. I run cattle down near the Bitterroots. Thought I'd find McCrae here. He's out clearing trail. Won't be back till dusk." Thorne spat into the dirt. "Figures. Man's got a habit of keeping to himself." She crossed her arms. "That's never been a fault." He chuckled, low and dry. "Didn't say it was. Just means you don't hear much till he's made up his mind." She didn't reply. Thorne tilted his head. "You come from the Zeller place. Word made it down to us last month." "Banker cleared the land after the girl ran off. I'm not hiding. Never said you were." He studied her a moment. "Porter's a decent man, stubborn, quiet, but decent. If he brought you here, there's a reason." "There is," he nodded. "Well then. Tell him next time he's got fence trouble on the South Ridge, I can lend a pair of hands." "I'll tell him." He turned the gelding and rode off without another word. When Porter returned near sundown, his coat was streaked with sawdust and a red squirrel pelt hung from his belt. Etta met him halfway to the barn. "You get it cleared?" she asked. "Enough for now." He unsaddled the horse, his movements slow but sure. "Anyone come by?" Man named Thorne. "Said he runs cattle near the Bitterroots. Offered help for your south fence." Porter paused, then nodded once. "He's good folk. We traded horses 2 winters back. His word holds." He asked if I was your woman. Porter didn't look up from the saddle. "What did you say?" "I said you brought me here for a reason." He set the saddle down and straightened. "And you still believe that?" "I do." They stood there in the deep blue of early evening, the scent of pine warming in the dusk air. "I was thinking," she said, "if that patch near the creek holds dry, we could turn it into something come spring." He looked at her square. "You thinking garden, maybe more, maybe bees," he nodded. "We'll need frames, wire, a box. I can stitch the netting." He stepped closer. "You want to build something here?" She held his gaze. "I already have." He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing around hers like they were meant to fit. No rush, no flare, just the quiet certainty of something rooted deep and sure. "I want you here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, and that was enough. The earth softened under their boots by early April, the last frost lines retreating into the shaded gullies. One morning, as the sun climbed over the eastern ridge, Etta knelt beside the creek with her skirts hiked above her ankles, tracing her fingers through the cold, moving water. She wasn't collecting or washing, just listening. The melt-off ran fast over the stones, and robins chirped from the budding birches overhead. Porter approached quietly, holding a bundle of thin-cut pine boards under one arm. "I figured we'd start the hive box today." You still want it near the elm? She looked up and nodded, drying her hands on her apron. It gets sun from morning till mid-afternoon. Should be enough warmth. They worked in tandem without much talk. Etta held the frame steady while Porter nailed it into place, his hammer deliberate but not slow. She handed him the wire mesh when he asked without needing the name for it. When they finished, he sat back on his heels and wiped the sweat from his brow with his sleeve. You ever kept something long enough to watch it grow? She asked. He looked at the box, then at her. Not till now. By late spring, the cabin smelled of sawdust and bread. Etta had taken to baking loaves once a week, trading some with Thorne's boy who rode up now and then with a sack of oats or a side of smoked venison. They never spoke long, just swapped what was needed and nodded on parting, but it was enough. One early evening, Etta sat stitching by the window while Porter stripped bark from a line of fence posts. A breeze came through the open shutters, carrying the scent of pine sap and something faintly sweet. I saw your mother's name stitched in that old quilt in the chest, she said without looking up. Mary Ellen. She was the one who taught you how to trim kindling the way you do, wasn't she? Every winter, said I'd lose fingers if I didn't learn proper. She sewed too, not much. But she could braid ropes smooth enough to make a horse docile. Etta smiled faintly and tied off her thread. She sounds like someone I'd have liked. She'd have liked you. She didn't waste time on folks who didn't work honest. They didn't speak again for a while. The light lengthened in the doorway, and the fire hadn't been lit in days. After supper, Porter stepped outside and came back with a length of dried apple bark. I've been thinking, he said, running the bark through his fingers. Come summer, we'll need more hands to clear the north pasture. If we stay ahead of it, we could bring in another dozen head next year. Etta looked over from where she was drying the tin plates. You mean to stretch the herd? I mean to make room for more. If you're planning to stay, I want this place to carry. She set the plate down slowly. And if I wasn't planning to stay, you'd have said so by now. She crossed to him and took the bark from his hand. I've been waiting for you to ask what I want. I reckon I'd like to hear it now. I want a garden longer than 3 rows, she said. I want a coop with hens that don't wander into the stove wood. I want to sleep in a bed that smells like pine and bread. And I want a man who looks at me like he did the first time I stood on my own 2 feet in this house. He met her eyes, quiet and sure. You got all that here. Then I'm not going anywhere. That night they lay side by side in the bed Porter had built before winter, a bed that had waited for more than just one man's rest. Her head tucked beneath his chin, his arm around her waist. No words, no promises spoken aloud. Just breathe, steady and shared. By midsummer, the garden bloomed full squash curling under broad leaves, beans climbing the stakes Porter had carved smooth. The bees took to the hive, and Etta watched them some mornings with her hands on her hips, sun streaking through her hair. She had taken to humming when she worked, though she'd never admit it aloud. Porter built her a rocker from cottonwood, sanding the arms till they gleamed. He set it beneath the porch overhang without a word. She found it the next morning, ran her hand over the grain, and sat down like she'd always belonged there. They married under the elm, just the 2 of them and Thorne as witness. He brought a bottle of something warm and a grin that reached his eyes. Afterward, Porter took her hand and led her back to the cabin, where the fire had long since been put out for the season, and yet the place felt warmer than ever seasons turned. The bees stayed. The garden grew. They added a second room to the cabin the following spring and filled it with shelves, tools, a larger table. Porter built a cradle from leftover pine. Etta lined it with the linen square she had stitched the winter she arrived, now bordered with new scenes. Trees, a fence line, a creek in thaw. When their daughter was born, she came into the world quiet, eyes wide and dark like her mother's. They named her Clara after the stillest part of the creek bend. At night, when the baby slept and the fire dimmed low, Porter would trace Etta's hand with his own, remembering the first time he'd taken it in the cold and heard her say she wanted to live. Now she did. And he did. And they did together.